Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of the YouTube show and podcast, None of Our Businesses, where we talk about the week's news, current events, topics. Sometimes it's related to accounting and finance and business, and sometimes not exactly, but it's always from the perspective of accountants. And with me today here is Tammy Hess.
Hi.
And Charlie Zigmund.
Thanks for joining us.
I'm Ty Carr, and what are we going to talk about today? Well, tax leaders looking for better tech skills in their teams. Are they sure about that? Treasury warns taxpayers to brace themselves for tax season. Probably not a surprise, the IRS is backlogged. The tax reference system, interesting for tax nerds, ridiculous for everyone else. Marijuana in Mississippi. And finally, from friend of the show, Brian Quo, cats around satellite dishes. All right, let's kick this off with Charlie.
All right, so I've got an article we can talk about from Accounting Today called Tax Leaders Are Looking for Better Tech Skills. And so the article goes on to say that the vast majority of tax and finance leaders see a need for improved technology and data skills in their employees, according to a new international survey. I thought the survey was kind of interesting. It looked at 1,650 tax and finance leaders in 40 countries, and it said that 84% of those respondents plan to adapt tax and finance functions over the next 2 years. And that, thanks to changes related to talent, but also regulation and technology advances have played a part in that as well. It said that most of the respondents, 95%, see a need for improved data and technology skills among their people. Talks about some of the issues they're facing. A lot of regulation is changing to online compliance as opposed to through paper forms. And so that has posed a lot of challenges. That's true in sales tax. It's also true in the value added tax as well, and in the UK. And so a couple of different things that are kind of precipice to why this is happening. But I guess I want to talk to you guys about, is there just any advice for business leaders who are considering maybe upping their tax tech, or maybe just looking at changing how they do business at all using technology? Any advice for people in that situation?
Yeah, I was actually talking to Tammy the other day about my perspective on small accounting firms and how they tend to emphasize standardization and process really heavily as a way to profitability. And I think there is a trade-off here between wanting your people to be very tech savvy and emphasizing standardization, because what I've seen, I think that what I've seen firms do is, tax as a function is has been a tech heavy function for a long time. There's specialty software for the tax preparation itself. There's software for GL management that accounting firms use, that the audit side may or may not use the same software that is used to bridge software systems or GL packages from clients and bring data over into tax software. Tax departments have had OCR, or the scanning and reading type technology using in different ways. But typically what a lot of firms do is they really lock down and narrow the use of the technology in a way that basically they try to make it as procedural as possible to cause the staff to basically only use the technology within very narrow parameters to avoid them from exceeding the scope of how they're going to use the technology, so that it doesn't get used in a way that might blow something up or confuse the more senior members of the firm. And so I think that with this call by tax leaders for their people to be more tech savvy, I think that it's got to be I think you have to be careful what you wish for, and you have to be consistent in what you're looking at, because as a former educator, from my perspective, it's if you want people to be dynamic and very capable in kind of using tech skills, you kind of have to open up that Pandora's box of, instead of saying, here is a software that you can only use one way in order to process a form that comes in, you have to say, there's a form coming in, there's a variety of tools available to you, have at it. And you have to give people the opportunity to kind of practice and try different things on doing that. And that's not a standardization type exercise, because it's hard for people to become tech savvy or to be tech savvy if they haven't explored different options and seen the limits of what the tools can do, and and seen where the pitfalls are. And if you're basically putting such stringent guardrails around them that prevents them from really ever using the tools in ways that are outside the box, then I think you're probably limiting their ability to truly be tech savvy. So that's all my very kind of biased perspective about kind of the small accounting firm industry and the tax world, that the way in which these firms typically try to standardize is counterproductive to growing tech savvy people.
Yeah. And I want to add to that too, because I think it's not, people have a different kind of interpretation of what tech savvy means. Like especially if it's like particular to like applications or typical software or something, if they have experience in that. And I would say that what people should also think about is, how do you go about learning a program? How do you go about working with various different ones? Because to me, when I think of tech savvy, I think that means that person can have the skills enough to figure out any type of application or software or device, versus one that says, oh yeah, I'm totally tech savvy, but it's only on one application. That's all I can do. I know the ins and outs of this one particular software. Then that's going to be great for use of that software, but it's probably not going to be as helpful when trying to transition to a different software or a version upgrade, because I hear that a lot too, where someone's using, a particular software, they've been using it for years, it has an upgrade, and all of a sudden they can't adapt to that new, technical software update.
No, I think you guys have hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right. And I just think it's going to be kind of interesting to see how this all plays out. I had a client say to me a quote that I thought was kind of relevant here that applies, is that, it's the Donald Rumsfeld quote of, there's the things we know, there's the known unknowns, and then there's the things that we don't know that we don't know. And that's the hard part. And I think when it comes to trying new technologies, that third category is often what it falls into. It's things that we didn't even know existed until we were looking for that exact tool. And so, like you said, I think, just having open-mindedness about that is really going to set you up to, to adapt to new changes in technology. All right. Do you have another article we can talk about, Tammy?
Yeah, so I have one coming our way from Political titled Treasury Warns Taxpayers to Brace for a Turbulent Tax Filing Season. Earlier this week, an official from the Treasury Department stated that due to existing backlogs and operational issues at the IRS, we may be seeing a frustrating filing season this year. The article mentioned that while normally the tax collector has roughly 1 million pieces of unopened mail, including tax returns, when starting a new tax season, it's currently facing 6 million of unprocessed individual returns as of December. For most taxpayers, the deadline for the 2021 tax returns or extensions is Monday, April 18th, 2022. So it's usually April 15th, but due to a DC holiday, it's now April 18th. As of today, there has not been any mention of extending the filing deadline. So hopefully people are getting their taxes ready. The article did give some helpful tips to navigate this turbulent tax filing season. 1, file electronically. 2, utilize the direct deposit option. 3, use the IRS website for self-help answers rather than calling the 1-800 number with questions, and double check the accuracy of your own return. According to the article, there's roughly 10% of tax returns that are being sent through snail mail. So it does appear that most people are already using that first helpful tip. But I do think that realizing the large volume of backlog that the IRS is facing is just really good to know. And it may give you a sense of how long you might be listening to hold music if you decide to give them a call with a question. So I wanted to kind of throw it out to you guys. If there are any other tips or suggestions that you may have as people are getting ready for the tax season.
I mean, I think probably the main thing is that, recognizing that the amount of work you have to do to get your tax return filed is a known thing, and it's not going to change as you wait a few months. It's basically going to be the same work. So the sooner you get it out of the way, the sooner it's out of your life. And I think that if the IRS is at the same time going to be having backlogs and delays, that's one more reason to just go ahead and get it all done. I know that's maybe self-serving as somebody who is helping people get their tax returns ready, but I think that it is true that if you can just get it out of your life, you'll feel that much better the rest of the year. What do you think, Ty?
Yeah, and I would say there's not necessarily a direct link between the IRS being backlogged and the timing of getting a refund, but I would suggest don't overpay the IRS. And it might be a little late for that for 2021, but maybe if you're thinking about, you're still at the time we write this, you're maybe like 2 or 3 days away from your fourth quarter payment. And maybe that is something to consider, is, that if you overpay the IRS, it may take longer to get that money back. It may, because in the past, when the IRS has been backlogged, the political environment has caused them to prioritize sending out refunds. So that's why there's not a direct line between the IRS otherwise being backlogged and when you might get your refund. But it stands to reason that if they are backlogged and overwhelmed, that it may take longer for something like that to happen. So yeah, I think that, that's what comes to my mind is, you don't want an agency that is overworked and backlogged and behind on everything, holding your money and waiting for them to decide when they can send it back to you, kind of thing, right? If you can avoid them holding your money, all the better. And probably, all of this advice speaks to what you think about for next year, because what are the chances that this time next year we're saying, oh yeah, the IRS is backlogged for 2022, 23? Pretty good, right? So probably if you are victim to the IRS backlog and that does delay you getting your refund or some cash back that you overpaid this year, maybe take a look at your withholdings and take a look at what maybe your estimated payments if you're a small business for 2022, and ask yourself, a lot of times people like to be conservative and cautious and they don't want to get nasty grams from the IRS for not having paid in enough, but maybe you should ask yourself, am I paying in too much, and what could that mean if things are backlogged?
And the last thing I would add is just kind of keep an eye out for whether or not they do extend the deadline. They have the last couple of years, obviously, but, don't assume that they're going to, and so don't delay, but, keep in mind that if they do, you'll see it pop up through some type of news media. I'm sure that they extended it, but don't, rely on that extension, but just kind of keep an eye out for that. And then Ty, I think you have the next article.
Yeah, this one was interesting. So there is a report from the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, titled "How Specifications of the Reference Tax System Affect CBO's Estimates of Tax Expenditures." And the theme today seems to be tax, so I thought I would throw in there with this handbook, because what for the tax nerd in me finds just fascinating about this, and then just the everyday citizen in me finds this just very ridiculously meta, in the sense of, what is a tax reference system? Well, it's a hypothetical tax system that doesn't actually exist, that the CBO and the congressional the Joint Committee on Taxation that they use for the purpose of trying to measure the dollar impact of tax, of special deductions and credits and things like that are going to be passed in the tax law or that already have been passed. So essentially the concept here is, well, our tax law in the US is just riddled with all kinds of special deductions for people and for businesses. It's also riddled with different kinds of credits and things of that nature. And so the concept is, well, if you wanted to measure the relative cost of those things, you would have to have something to measure it against. You'd have to have, if you want to measure the cost of all the special deductions in our tax system as it works, you would have to have a tax reference system that doesn't have all those deductions and things. And so, believe it or not, there is such a thing. There is a tax reference calculation, a tax reference system. But what is mind-boggling about this is that it is just as subjective, in my opinion. That tax reference system is just as subjective as the real tax system, because in the tax reference system, for example, I think more of our listeners might relate to it on an individual basis. This is true both. The tax reference system has a methodology for computing tax for corporations, but it also has one for computing individuals. And when it computes the tax for individuals, they've collectively decided, the CBO and the Joint Committee for Taxation, that things like the standard deduction and exemptions for your dependents, that those should be in the reference system, that is something that would be in a quote unquote normal tax system. But things like the medical deductions, or special interest deductions, special property tax deductions, things of that nature. Those are not in the reference system because those are somehow outside of a regular tax system. So this idea, and you could debate that, is a standard deduction in your tax return something that would be in any government's regular tax system? Apparently the CBO thinks so. But I think that's my point, is that this reference system is inherently subjective in and of itself. The yardstick by which we're going to compare the U.S. tax system to see, what provisions, what special expenses or deductions are more or less costing us the yardstick is a subjective yardstick to begin with. And that's kind of what I took away from this. But it is, it is just interesting that we are so complicated that not only do we have a complicated tax law, but we have a complicated hypothetical tax system in this country to use for measurement and for congressional budgeting purposes. So I'll throw it back to you all. What do you think of this reference tax system, the hypothetical tax system?
Boy, that sounds so meta and so kind of, I don't want to say American, but so, of us to have a complicated system with another fake complicated hypothetical system in the background. And I've been kind of thinking, as you've been talking about, why might it be that they would set aside this one thing? And I think I was thinking about, it could be completely self-serving to the eyes of the IRS to do that, because I think if they look at it as, this is the amount of money somebody makes before I care to chase them for it, then if we can accept that that saves us money as the IRS, then we actually want this one thing to count even in our hypothetical, because we know that will still be true. But I have no idea if that's made up or whatever. But yeah, I think if there's any reason they would do it, it'd have to be some self-serving reason, and that's the only one I could think of. What do you got, Tammy?
The only thing I can really add to this conversation is that the fact that it's a complex system, a complex referencing system. You just keep on adding the level of complexity. And then you wonder why it is that, most people probably could, in theory, if you have just a regular W-2, you should be able to do your own tax return, that you're nervous about doing so because there's all these things in the background that you're trying to figure out and you have no idea, and you're fearful because you don't want to do it wrong, because there's nothing worse than having the IRS after you. But it's like, how my kind of question that I keep on coming back to is just like, we should try to make things simpler and easier for folks to be able to do the tax returns and to file their own stuff, rather than making it more complex and more confusing to where then they're paying out, and it can be a lot of money to do a tax return, even if you have like a very simplistic return to do, that it just adds a lot of stress, confusion, and costs associated with it. It boggles my mind for a Friday.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, many of our listeners and viewers probably have heard of such thing as the alternative minimum tax, which is in and of itself already an alternative tax system. It's an alternative tax system that is not a hypothetical, because it is an alternative tax system that is computed in the background, and under certain conditions, it is the system by which a taxpayer would actually pay tax. And so, bringing up this reference tax system just to make this story just so much more fun, this reference tax system is then yet a third basis of computing tax, but it is purely hypothetical. So it's not, this reference tax system is actually not used by the IRS at all. It's used by Congress in debating whether the cost of a special deduction is worthwhile or not. So it's basically to say, well, if we give taxpayers this extra deduction, what's that going to cost us in tax revenue? In order to do that calculation, the Congressional Budget Office has to compute the difference between the actual tax system, which actually includes, as I just highlighted, two different possible tax calculations, regular or alternative minimum tax. The Congressional Budget Office has to compare the results under that to the results of this reference tax system that nobody actually pays tax under, in order to determine the cost in terms of federal budgeting of a proposed tax law or a proposed tax deduction. So, yeah. And I could go on with some other interesting, it's deeper. Like if you asked, is that the end of different ways to compute income? Oh no, it isn't. I can get you into some other income calculations that are done within the tax law that would add to the story of different versions of calculating income. So for those who think that income is a universal concept, it surely is not for Congress or tax law here in the US.
Well, and I just want to add one more thing, which is kind of contrary to how crazy this all sounds. As like a business operator, you may want to be thinking in these same lines of thought when you're evaluating your own business decisions to say, how does opportunity cost play into this? What does this decision, which is this is different than tax, but what does this decision that we're doing today, how does that compare to whatever some other default would be? And that's how we evaluate if something is going to make sense. And so I think having this hypothetical that we're constantly comparing to, as weird and meta as it can sound, I think there's a way to use it as a business operator to actually make better choices. I don't know that that's anything to do with the goal of this actual tax system, but yeah, just kind of an interesting thought. So I got another article in an entirely different vein that I thought we could talk about from the marijuana moment. Haven't we all had a few of those? And so it's called Mississippi Senate Votes to Legalize Medical Marijuana, Defying the Governor's Veto Threat. And so I'm maybe a little biased coming from Oregon because we've had legalized marijuana for quite some time. But basically, Mississippi had a Senate vote 47-5 to legalize medical marijuana. And it came more than a year after they had approved this a ballot measure that was then later overturned in court. So they've already tried to do this and it got overturned. And I think it's interesting to see how much pushback there is. They talked about there's this new proposal, the bill called SB 2095, for anyone wanting to look this up. It talks about setting a limit of up to 3.5 grams, and this is just for medical. This is not recreational at this point. They would have what they call a medical cannabis equivalency unit, because I thought it was pretty funny that they had a nice little term for that. And so, it's just kind of an interesting thing. It said that patients or caretakers would be forbidden from growing their own cannabis under the proposal. So that's not something that would happen. And a poll released in June found that a majority of Mississippi voters support legalizing it. So while there's all this pushback, and in my eyes, they're so behind the times on this issue, but what they're even pushing for is such a limited application of it because it's medical and because it's only in for such limited quantities. It just seems like they're way behind. I want to get you guys' take on is that right, or are we going to see this happening more and more in states that have been holding out on medical marijuana or recreational?
Yeah, I mean, to be legalizing marijuana for purely medical purposes at this point is so 20 years ago, right? 15 years ago. It's kind of amazing that how far behind that is. But on a different note, I kind of wondered about this from an actual operational standpoint. It's like, what is growing cannabis like in a more kind of humid, southern swampy environment versus over here on the West Coast, where so much cannabis is grown in kind of the Pacific climate in Northern California and Southern Oregon? I don't know that any of us have an answer to that, but maybe there's a viewer out there that wants to throw it in the comments.
Well, I think if they can't get it outdoors, they can definitely grow a hydroponic grow indoors, and that would be the route. Now, I don't know how feasible that is or how cost effective that is in comparison, but that would be the other way to go.
I think that you're right, Charlie, that we're going to see more of this as states start to really kind of open up and be a little bit allow this in their states. Because I did a quick search, and there's 36 states that have approved for medical marijuana usage, and then there's 18 states that are for recreational. I don't know if those are the right search or numbers, but that's what I found in my quick little search. So I think that we still have a long way to go. And it just seems odd to us, probably to us, being here on the West Coast, where it's been legalized for quite some time now, and so we've seen it really growing and doing that. But it does bring me back to the time when it was on the Oregon ballots and kind of the debates and all that stuff that was happening at that time. And it is interesting to see see that, states are continuing to do that in order to get the movement moved forward. So we'll kind of have to wait to see if, eventually all states are going to be in some type of way, whether it be for medical or for recreational use, or if it's still, many years out. I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to leave you with one last quote on this article that I thought was worth sharing, which is that there's a senator who's opposing this, whose last name is Blackwell. And he said that, let me see if I can get this here. So he criticized what he described as the paranoid reefer madness, chicken little belief expressed by few skeptics that if we pass a medical cannabis bill, the streets of Mississippi will be flooded by pot smoking zombies. And so I just want to say that, approving medical marijuana for people who are cancer patients, that kind of a thing, is such a different thing than flooding the streets with cannabis-induced pot smoking zombies. So on that, I'll kick it over. I think that's all we've got to talk about today. Or no, we've got one more. I apologize. Tammy, what you got for us?
So I have a lighthearted article about cats and satellites. You may have heard of the satellite Starlink, which is operated by SpaceX. Starlink started to see some promising improvements in performance and experienced a steady gain in 2021. But have you heard how much cats seem to love Starlink? A customer tweeted, "Starlink works great until the cats find out that the dish gives off a little heat on cold days," along with a picture with 5 cats snuggling on a satellite. Apparently, the satellite's snow melt mode feature, which was designed to keep snow from building up and interfering with the signal, provides a comfortable place for cats and other animals to stay warm. Starlink has been working on its goal to deliver high-speed internet usage in rural areas. And so hopefully cats, which are also probably high in rural areas, don't prevent them from achieving this goal. But maybe they can try to figure out how to capitalize it or, use it as a media spin somehow. But what this does lead me to ponder is, could or should an inventor predict unconventional uses of the things that they create?
I think they should try. I don't think that they can realistically foresee all of the different situations. I think what they should do, the term that I've heard applied to this concept before is called stakeholder analysis, and they should think about their customers, or in this case, cats, right? A stakeholder can be quite a wide range of things, but in this case, cats are somehow impacted by our business decisions. And so in some way, if not them, then the owners or someone is involved in what we're doing. And we should try to think about that. But at the same time, there has to be grace given for the fact that this is a very obscure issue, and we can't expect them to see this without without having tried it first. So I give them some grace, but I think we should all be trying to capture these issues if we can.
I missed whether, is there actually anything wrong with the cats accumulating around the dishes?
Well,
why not just let them do their thing?
There's a few things. The first thing would be that they're pretty sure that the weight of the cats, especially 5 cats on one satellite, could cause some issues or damage to the actual device. They aren't sure if it's going to cause any issues with the signal in terms of if snow was going to, impact it, would, 5 cats sitting on the dish impact it? It may. But the other thing that, and thinking about this is that it could be harmful to the cats. They're sitting on, a satellite dish with them beaming things all throughout. I'm not sure if they've identified or kind of, really sourced that out yet or figured that out yet, but I would say that there probably will be. But I think go ahead.
No, I think that covers my question. Yeah. I don't think I can say anything politically correct on that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, and Charlie had mentioned it earlier, of, when you're thinking about creating something and then you realize that either, if it's something that's going to be used for one time and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's going to have issues with recycling, or, like the coffee pods that were big or still are big, thinking about things of that nature. When you're in the startup of something, you probably aren't thinking about the long-term impacts of the usage or the unintended useful things that people might find as a convenient way to, I guess I was going to say store their cats, but have their cats sit there to keep warm or whatever that may be. But there are some things that you probably don't see until they start, but it is something that you could probably think about in a little ways if you have, just kind of ponder those things before you launch something. It might be a little bit helpful, or figure out what your workaround is going to be.
All right, everybody, that's going to do it for our podcast and YouTube show, None of Our Businesses. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and tune back in again next week for more business updates from an accountant's perspective. And please check out our sister podcast, Profitless on Purpose, where they're discussing anything and everything relating to the nonprofit space. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.